Hello, wildlings. I'm your creep smith, and you found my fear forge. Lucky you. Hey, wildlings. When the world gives you what you want, it's time to check for traps. Doubly so when you already know the adversary you face is, well, devilishly cruel and capable. Continuing on with the finale of the adventures of our occult operator Harry D'Amour, Part 4, The Last of the Last Illusion, by Master Malefactor Clive Barker. I'm just going to explain about the brother-in-law, Harry said. The brother-in-law? Dorothea said, sitting down. The sigh of her legs crossing was the most enchanting sound Harry had heard in about 24 hours. Oh, please tell me about the brother-in-law. Before Harry could open his mouth to speak, Valentin said, "It's not her, Harry." The words, spoken without a trace of drama, took a few seconds to make sense. Even when they did, their lunacy was self-evident. Here she was, in the flesh, perfect in every detail. "What are you talking about?" Harry said. "How much more plainly can I say it?" Valentin replied. "It's not her. It's a trick, an illusion. They know where we are, and they sent this up to spy out our defenses." Harry would have laughed, but that these accusations were bringing tears to Dorothea's eyes. "Stop it," he told Valentin. "No, Harry. You think for a moment. All the traps they've laid, all the beasts they've mustered. Do you suppose she could have escaped from that?" He moved away from the window towards Dorothea. "Where's Butterfield?" he spat. "Down the hall, waiting for your signal?" "Shut up," Harry said. "He's scared to come up here himself, isn't he?" Valentin went on. "Scared of Swan. Scared of us, probably, after what we did to his gelding." Dorothea looked at Harry. "Make him stop," she said. Harry halted Valentin's advance with a hand on his bony chest. "You heard the lady," he said. "That's no lady," Valentin replied, his eyes blazing. "I don't know what it is, but it's no lady." Dorothea stood up. "I came here because I hoped I'd be safe," she said. "You are safe," Harry said. "Not with him around, I'm not," she replied, looking at Valentin. "I think I'd be wiser going." Harry touched her arm. "No," he told her. "Mr. D'Amour," she said sweetly, "you've already earned your fee 10 times over. Now I think it's time I took responsibility for my husband." Harry scanned that mercurial face. There wasn't a trace of deception in it. "I have a car downstairs," she said. "I wonder, could you carry him downstairs for me?" Harry heard a noise like a cornered dog behind him and turned to see Valentin standing beside Swan's corpse. He'd picked up the heavy-duty cigarette lighter from the desk and was flicking it. Sparks came, but no flame. "What the hell are you doing?" Harry demanded. Valentin didn't look at the speaker, but at Dorothea. "She knows," he said. He'd gotten the knack of the lighter, and the flame flared up. Dorothea made a small, desperate sound. "Please don't," she said. "We'll all burn with him if necessary," Valentin said. "He's insane." Dorothea's tears had suddenly gone. "She's right," Harry told Valentin. "You're acting like a madman." "And you're a fool to fall for a few tears," came the reply. "Can't you see that if she takes him, we've lost everything we've fought for?" "Don't listen," she murmured. "You know me, Harry. You trust me." "What's under that face of yours?" Valentin said. "What are you? A coprolite? Homunculus?" The names meant nothing to Harry. All he knew was the proximity of the woman at his side, her hand laid upon his arm. "And what about you?" she said to Valentin, then more softly, "Why don't you show us your wound?" She forsook the shelter of Harry's side and crossed to the desk. The lighter flame guttered at her approach. "Go on," she said, her voice no louder than a breath. "I dare you." She glanced round at Harry. "Ask him, D'Amour. Ask him to show you what he's got hidden under the bandages." "What's she talking about?" Harry asked. The glimmer of trepidation in Valentin's eyes was enough to convince Harry that there was merit in Dorothea's request. Explain, he said. Valentin didn't get the chance, however. Distracted by Harry's demand, he was easy prey when Dorothea reached across the desk and knocked the lighter from his hand. He bent to retrieve it, but she seized the ad hoc bundle of bandaging and pulled. It tore and fell away. She stepped back. See? Valentin stood revealed. The creature on 83rd Street had torn the sham of humanity from his arm. The limb beneath was a mass of blue-black scales. Each digit in the blistered hand ended in a nail that opened and closed like a parrot's beak. He made no attempt to conceal the truth. Shame eclipsed every other response. "I warned you," she said. "I warned you he wasn't to be trusted." Valentin stared at Harry. "I have no excuses," he said. "I only ask you to believe that I want what's best for Swan." "How can you?" Dorothea said. "You're a demon." "More than that," Valentin replied. "I'm Swan's tempter, his familiar, his creature. But I belong to him more than I ever belonged to the Gulfs, and I will defy them," he looked at Dorothea, "and their agents." She turned to Harry. "You have a gun," she said. "Shoot the filth. You mustn't suffer a thing like that to live." Harry looked at the pustulant arm, at the clacking fingernails. What further repugnance was there in weight behind the fleshy facade? "Shoot it," the woman said. He took the gun from his pocket. Valentin seemed to have shrunk in the moments since the revelation of his true nature. Now he leaned against the wall, his face slimy with despair. "Kill me then," he said to Harry. "Kill me if I revolt you so much. But Harry, I beg you, don't give Swan to her. Promise me that. Wait for the driver to come back and dispose of the body by whatever means you can. Just don't give it to her." "Don't listen," Dorothea said. "He doesn't care about Swan the way I do." Harry raised the gun. Even looking straight at death, Valentin didn't flinch. "You failed, Judas," she said to Valentin. "The magician's mine." "What magician?" said Harry. "Why, Swan, of course," she replied lightly. "How many magicians have you got up here?" Harry dropped his bead on Valentin. "He's an illusionist," he said. "You told me that at the very beginning. Never call him a magician, you said." "Don't be pedantic," she replied, trying to laugh off her faux pas. He leveled the gun at her. She threw back her head suddenly, her face contracting, and loosed a sound of which, had Harry not heard it from a human throat, he would not have believed a larynx capable. It rang down the corridor and the stairs in search of some waiting ear. "Butterfield is here," said Valentin flatly. Harry nodded. In the same moment she came towards him, her features grotesquely contorted. She was strong and quick, a blur of venom that took him off guard. He heard Valentin tell him to kill her before she transformed. It took him a moment to grasp the significance of this, by which time she had her teeth at his throat. One of her hands was a cold vice around his wrist. He sensed a strength in her sufficient to powder his bones. His fingers were already numbed by her grip. He had no time to do more than to press the trigger. The gun went off, and her breath in his throat seemed to gush from her. Then she loosed her hold on him and staggered back. The shot had blown open her abdomen. He shook to see what he had done. The creature, for all its shriek, still resembled a woman that he might have loved. "Good," said Valentin, as the blood hit the office floor in gouts. "Now it has to show itself." Hearing him, she shook her head. "This is all there is to show," she said. Harry threw the gun down. "My God," he said softly. It's her." Dorothea grimaced. The blood continued to come. "Some part of her," she replied. "Have you always been with them?" Valentin asked. "Of course not." "Why then?" "Nowhere to go," she said, her voice fading by the syllable. "Nothing to believe in. All lies. Everything lies." "So you sided with Butterfield?" "Better hell," she said, "than a false heaven." "Who taught you that?" Harry murmured. "Who do you think?" she replied, turning her gaze on him. Though her strength was going out of her with the blood, her eyes still blazed. "You're finished, D'Amour," she said. "You and the demon and Swan, there's nobody left to help you now." Despite the contempt in her words, he couldn't stand and watch her bleed to death. Ignoring Valentin's imperative that he keep clear, he went across to her. As he stepped within range, she lashed out at him with astonishing force. The blow blinded him a moment. He fell against the tall filing cabinet, which toppled sideways. He had hit the ground together. It spilled papers, curses. He was vaguely aware that the woman was moving past him to escape, but he was too busy keeping his head from spinning to prevent her. When equilibrium finally returned, she'd gone, leaving her bloody handprints on the wall and door. Chaplin, the janitor, was protective of his territory. The basement of the building was a private domain in which he had sorted through office trash, fed his beloved furnace, and read aloud his favorite passages from the good book, all without fear of interruption. His bowels, which were at this point far from healthy, allowed him little slumber. A couple of hours a night, no more, which he supplemented with dozing through the day. It wasn't so bad. He had the seclusion of the basement to retire to whenever life upstairs became too demanding, and the forced heat would sometimes bring strange waking dreams. Was this such a dream, this insipid fellow in his fine suit? If not, how had he gained access to the basement when the door was locked and bolted? He asked no questions of the intruder. Something about the way the man stared at him baffled his tongue. "Chaplin," the fellow said, his thin lips barely moving, "I'd like you to open the furnace." In other circumstances, he might well have picked up his shovel and clouted the stranger across the head. The furnace was his baby. He knew, as no one else knew, its quirks and occasional petulance. He loved, as no one else loved, the roar it gave when it was content. He did not take kindly to the proprietorial tone the man had used, but he'd lost the will to resist. He picked up a rag and opened the peeling door, offering its heart to the man as Lot had offered his daughters to the stranger in Sodom. Butterfield smiled at the smell of heat from the furnace. From 3 floors above, he heard the woman crying out for help, and then, a few moments later, a shot. She'd failed. He thought she would, but her life was forfeit anyway. There was no loss in sending her into the breach, in the slim chance that she might have coaxed the body from its keepers. It would have saved the inconvenience of a full-scale attack, but no matter. To have Swan's soul was worth any effort. He had defiled the good name of the Prince of Lies, and for that he would suffer as no other miscreant magician ever had. Besides Swan's punishments, Faust's would be an inconvenience, and Napoleon's a pleasure cruise. As the echoes of the shot died above, he took the black lacquer box from his jacket pocket. The janitor's eyes were turned heavenward. He too had heard the shot. It was nothing, Butterfield told him. Stoke the fire. Chaplin obeyed. The heat in the cramped basement rapidly grew. The janitor began to sweat. The visitor did not. He stood mere feet from the open furnace door and gazed into the brightness with impassive features. At last he seemed satisfied. "Enough," he said, and opened the lacquer box. Chaplin thought he glimpsed movement within the box, as though it were full to the lid with maggots, but before he had a chance to look more closely, the box and contents were pitched into the flames. "Close the door," Butterfield said. Chaplin obeyed. "You may watch over them a while, if it pleases you. They need the heat. It makes them mighty." He left the janitor to keep his vigil beside the furnace, and went back up to the hallway. He'd left the street door open, and a pusher had come in out of the cold to do his business with a client. They bartered in the shadows until the pusher caught sight of the lawyer. "Oh, don't mind me," Butterfield said, and started up the stairs. He found the Widow Swan on the first landing. She was not quite dead, but he quickly finished the job that D'Amour had started. "We're in trouble," said Valentin. "I hear noises downstairs. Is there any other way out of here?" Harry sat on the floor, leaning against the toppled cabinet, and tried not to think of Dorothea's face as the bullet found her, or of the creature he was now reduced to kneading. "There's a fire escape," he said. "It runs down to the back of the building." "Show me," said Valentin, attempting to haul him to his feet. "Keep your hands off me!" Valentin withdrew, bruised by the rebuff. "I'm sorry," he said. "Maybe I shouldn't hope for your acceptance, but I do." Harry said nothing, just got to his feet amongst a litter of reports and photographs. He'd had a dirty life, spying on adulteries for vengeful spouses, dredging gutters for lost children, keeping company with scum because it rose to the top, and the rest just drowned. Could Valentin's soul be much grimier? "The fire escape's down the hall," he said. "We can get Swan out," Valentin said. "Still give him a decent cremation." The demon's obsession with his master's dignity was chastening in its way. "But you have to help me, Harry." "I'll help you," he said, avoiding the sight of the creature. "Just don't expect love and affection, all right?" If it were possible to hear a smile, that's what he heard. "They want this over and done with before dawn," the demon said. "Well, it can't be far from that now." "An hour, maybe," Valentin replied, "but it's enough. Either way, it's enough." The sound of the furnace soothed Chaplin. Its rumbles and rattlings were as familiar as the complaint of his own intestines. But there was another sound growing behind the door, the like of which he'd never heard before. His mind made foolish pictures to go with it, of pigs laughing, of glass and barbed wire being ground between the teeth, of hoofed feet dancing on the door. As the noises grew, so did his trepidation, but when he went to the basement door to summon help, it was locked. The key had gone, and now, as if matters weren't bad enough, the lights went out. He began to fumble for a prayer. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour..." But he stopped when a voice addressed him quite clearly. "Michaelmas," it said. It was unmistakably the voice of his mother, and there could be no doubt of its source either. It came from the furnace. "Michaelmas," she demanded, "are you going to let me cook in here?" It wasn't possible, of course, that she was there in the flesh. She'd been dead 13 long years, but some phantom, perhaps? He believed in phantoms. Indeed, he'd seen them on occasion, coming and going from the cinemas on 42nd Street, arm in arm. "Open up, Michaelmas," his mother told him, in that special voice she used when she had some treat for him. Like a good child, he approached the door. He'd never felt such heat off the furnace as he felt now. He could smell the hairs on his arm withering. "Open the door," Mother said again. There was no denying her. Despite the searing air, he reached to comply. "That fucking janitor," said Harry, giving the sealed fire escape door a vengeful kick. "This door's supposed to be left unlocked at all times. It's a fire escape." He pulled at the chains that were wrapped around the handles. "We'll have to take the stairs." There was a noise from back down the corridor, a roar in the heating system which made the antiquated radiators rattle. At that moment, down in the basement, Michaelmas Chaplin was obeying his mother and opening the furnace door. A scream climbed from below as his face was blasted off. Then the sound of the basement door being smashed open. Harry looked at Valentin, his repugnance momentarily forgotten. "Well, we shan't be taking the stairs," the demon said. Bellowings and chatterings and screechings were already on the rise. Whatever had found birth in the basement, it was precocious. "We have to find something to break down the door," Valentin said. "Anything." Harry tried to think his way through the adjacent offices. His mind's eye peeled for some tool that would make an impression on either the fire door or the substantial chains that kept it closed, but there was nothing useful, only typewriters and filing cabinets. "Think, man," Valentin said. He ransacked his memory. Some heavy-duty instrument was required, a crowbar, a hammer, an axe. There was an agent called Shapiro on the floor below who exclusively represented porno performers, one of whom had attempted to blow his balls off the month before. She'd failed, but he'd boasted one day on the stairs that he had now purchased the biggest axe he could find, and would happily take the head of any client who attempted an attack upon his person. The commotion from below was simmering down. The hush was, in its way, more distressing than the din that had preceded it. "We haven't got much time," the demon said. Harry left him at the chained door. "Can you get Swan?" he said as he ran. "I'll do my best." By the time Harry reached the top of the stairs, the last chatterings were dying away. As he began down the flight, they ceased altogether. There was no way to judge how close the enemy were. On the next floor? Round that next corner? He tried not to think of them, but his feverish imagination populated every dirty shadow. He reached the bottom of the flight without incident, however, and slunk along the darkened second-floor corridor to Shapiro's office. Halfway to his destination, he heard a low hiss behind him. He looked over his shoulder, his body itching to run. One of the radiators, heated beyond its limits, had sprung a leak. Steam was escaping from its pipes and hissing as it went. He let his heart climb down out of his mouth, and then hurried on to the door of Shapiro's office, praying that the man hadn't simply been shooting the breeze with his talk of axes. If so, well, they were done for. The office was locked, of course, but he elbowed the frosted glass out and reached through to let himself in, fumbling for the light switch. The walls were plastered with photographs of sex goddesses. They scarcely claimed Harry's attention. His panic fed upon itself with every heartbeat that he spent here. Clumsily he scoured the office, turning the furniture over in his impatience, but there was no sight of Shapiro's axe. Now, another noise from below. It crept up the staircase and along the corridor in search of him, an unearthly cacophony like the one he'd heard on 83rd Street. It set his teeth on edge. The nerve of his rotting molar began to throb afresh. What did the music signal? Their advance? In desperation, he crossed to Shapiro's desk to see if the man had any other item that might be pressed into service, and there, tucked out of sight between the desk and the wall, he found the axe. He pulled it from hiding. As Shapiro had boasted, it was hefty, its weight the first reassurance that Harry had felt in far too long. He returned to the corridor. The steam from the fractured pipe had thickened. Through its veils it was apparent that the concert had taken on new fervor. The doleful wailing rose and fell, punctuated by some flaccid percussion. He braved the cloud of steam and hurried to the stairs. As he put his foot on the bottom step, the music seemed to catch him by the back of the neck and whisper, "Listen," in his ear. But he had no desire to listen. The music was vile. But somehow, while he was distracted by finding the axe, it had wormed its way into his skull. It drained his limbs of strength. In moments, the axe began to seem an impossible burden. "Come on down," the music coaxed him. "Come on down and join the band." Though he tried to form the simple word no, the music was gaining influence upon him with every note played. He began to hear melodies in the caterwauling, long circuitous themes that made his blood sluggish and his thoughts idiot. He knew there was no pleasure to be had in the music's source, that it tempted him only to pain and desolation, yet he could not shake off its delirium. His feet began to move to the call of the pipers. He forgot Valentin, forgot Swan, and all ambition for escape, and instead began to descend the stairs. The melody became more intricate. He could hear voices now, singing some charmless accompaniment in a language he didn't comprehend. From somewhere above he heard his name called, but he ignored the summons. The music clutched him close, and now, as he descended the next flight of stairs, the musicians came into view. They were brighter than he'd anticipated, and more various, more baroque in their configurations, the manes, the multiple heads, more particular in their decoration, the suit of flayed faces, the rouged anus, and his drugged eyes now stung to see, more atrocious in their choice of instruments. Such instruments. Byron was there, his bones sucked clean and drilled through with stops, his bladder and his lungs teased through slashes in his body as reservoirs for the piper's breath. He was draped inverted across the musician's lap, and even now was played upon, the sax ballooning, the tongueless head giving out a wheezing note. Dorothea was slumped beside him, no less transformed, the strings of her gut made taut between her splinted legs like an obscene lyre, her breasts drummed upon. There were other instruments too, men who had come in off the street and fallen prey to the band. Even Chaplin was there, much of his flesh burned away, his rib cage played upon indifferently as well. "I didn't take you for a music lover," Butterfield said, drawing upon a cigarette and smiling welcome. "Put down your axe and join us." The word axe reminded Harry of the weight in his hands, though he couldn't find his way through the bars of music to remember what it signified. "Don't be afraid," Butterfield said. "You're an innocent in this. We hold no grudge against you." "Dorothea," he said. "She was an innocent too," said the lawyer, "until we showed her some sights." Harry looked at the woman's body, at the terrible changes that they'd wrought upon her. Seeing them, a tremor began in him, and something came between him and the music. The imminence of tears blotted it out. "Put down the axe," Butterfield told him. But the sound of the concert could not compete with the grief that was mounting in him. Butterfield seemed to see the change in his eyes, disgust and anger growing there. He dropped his half-smoked cigarette and signaled for the music-making to stop. "Must it be death, then?" Butterfield said, but the inquiry was scarcely voiced before Harry started down the last few stairs toward him. He raised the axe and swung it at the lawyer, but the blow was misplaced. The blade plowed the plaster of the wall, missing its target by a foot. At this eruption of violence, the musicians threw down their instruments and began across the lobby, trailing their coats and tails in blood and grease. Harry caught their advance from the corner of his eye. Behind the horde, still rooted in the shadows, was another form, larger than the largest of the mustered demons, from which there now came a thump that might have been that of a vast jackhammer. He tried to make sense of the sound or sight, but could do neither. There was no time for curiosity. The demons were almost upon him. Butterfield glanced round to encourage their advance, and Harry, catching the moment, swung the axe a second time. The blow caught Butterfield's shoulder. The arm was instantly severed. The lawyer shrieked. Blood sprayed the wall. There was no time for a third blow, however. The demons were reaching for him, smiles lethal. He turned on the stairs and began up them, taking the steps 2, 3, and 4 at a time. Butterfield was still shrieking below. From the flight above, he heard Valentin calling his name. He had neither the time nor breath to answer. They were on his heels, their ascent a din of grunts and shouts and beating wings, and behind it all the jackhammer thumped its way to the bottom of the flight, its noise more intimidating by far than the chatterings of the berserkers at his back. It was in his belly, that thump, in his bowels, like death's heartbeat, steady and irrevocable. On the second landing, he heard a whirring sound behind him, and half turned to see a human-headed moth the size of a vulture climbing in the air towards him. He met it with the axe blade and hacked it down. There was a cry of excitement from below as the body flapped down the stairs, its wings working like paddles. Harry sped up the remaining flight to where Valentin was standing, listening. It wasn't the chatter he was attending to, nor the cries of the lawyer. It was the jackhammer. "They brought the rapparee," he said. "I wounded Butterfield, I heard. But that won't stop them. We can still try the door. I think we're too late, my friend." "No!" said Harry, pushing past Valentin. The demon had given up trying to drag Swan's body to the door and had laid the magician out in the middle of the corridor, his hands crossed on his chest. In some last mysterious act of reverence, he had set folded paper bowls at Swan's head and feet, and laid a tiny origami flower. He lingered, only long enough to reacquaint the door, and proceeded to hack at the chains. It would be a long job. The assault did more damage to the axe than to the steel links. He didn't dare give up, however. This was their only escape route now, other than flinging themselves to their deaths from one of the windows. That he would do, he decided, if the worst came to worst. Jump and die rather than be their plaything. His arms soon became numb with the repeated blows. It was a lost cause. The chain was unimpaired. His despair was further fueled by a cry from Valentin, a high, weeping call that he could not leave unanswered. He left the fire door and returned past the body of Swan to the head of the stairs. The demons had Valentin. They swarmed on him like wasps on a sugar stick, tearing him apart. For the briefest of moments, he struggled free of their rage, and Harry saw the mask of humanity in rags and the truth glistening bloodily beneath. He was as vile as those besetting him, but Harry went to his aid anyway, as much to wound the demons as to save their prey. The wielded axe did damage this way and that, sending Valentin's tormentors reeling back down the stairs, limbs lopped, faces opened. They did not all bleed. One sliced belly spilled eggs in thousands. One wounded head gave birth to tiny eels which fled to the ceiling and hung there by their lips. In the melee, he lost sight of Valentin, forgot about him indeed until he heard the jackhammer again, and remembered the broken look on Valentin's face when he'd named the thing. He'd called it the rapparee, or something like. And now, as his memory shaped the word, it came into sight. It shared no trait with its fellows. It had neither wings, nor mane, nor verity. It seemed scarcely even to be flesh, but forged. An engine that needed only malice to keep its wheels turning. At its appearance, the rest retreated, leaving Harry at the top of the stairs in a litter of spawn. Its progress was slow, its half-dozen limbs moving in oiled, elaborate configurations to pierce the walls of the staircase and so haul itself up. It brought to mind a man on crutches, throwing the sticks ahead of him and levering his weight after, but there was nothing invalid about the thunder of its body, no pain in the white eye that burned in its sickle head. Harry thought that he'd known despair, but he hadn't. Only now did he taste its ash in his throat. There was only the window left for him, that and the welcoming ground. He backed away from the top of the stairs, forsaking the axe. Valentin was in the corridor. He was not dead, as Harry had presumed, but kneeling beside the corpse of Swan, his own body drooling from 100 wounds. Now he bent close to the magician, offering his apologies to his dead master, no doubt, but no, there was more to it than that. He had the cigarette lighter in his hand and was lighting a taper. Then, murmuring some prayer to himself as he went, he lowered the taper to the mouth of the magician. The origami flower caught and flared up. Its flame was oddly bright, and spread with supernatural efficiency across Swan's face and down his body. Valentin hauled himself to his feet, the firelight burnishing his scales. He found enough strength to incline his head to the body as its cremation began. Then his wounds overcame him. He fell backwards and lay still. Harry watched as the flames mounted. Clearly the body had been sprinkled with gasoline or something similar, for the fire raged up in moments, gold and green. Suddenly something took a hold of his leg. He looked down to see that a demon with flesh like ripe raspberries still had an appetite for him. Its tongue was coiled around Harry's shin. Its claws reached for his groin. The assault made him forget the cremation or the rapparee. He bent to tear at the tongue with his bare hands, but its slickness confounded his attempts. He staggered back as the demon climbed his body, its limbs embracing him. The struggle took them to the ground, and they rolled away from the stairs along the other arm of the corridor. The struggle was far from uneven. Harry's repugnance was at least the match of the demon's ardor. His torso pressed to the ground, he suddenly remembered the rapparee. Its advance reverberated in every board and wall. Now it came into sight at the top of the stairs, and turned its slow head towards Swan's funeral pyre. Even from this distance, Harry could see that Valentin's last-ditch attempts to destroy his master's body had failed. The fire had scarcely begun to devour the magician. They would have him still. Eyes on the rapparee, Harry neglected his more intimate enemy and had thrust a piece of flesh into his mouth. His throat filled up with pungent fluid. He felt himself choking. Opening his mouth, he bit down hard on the organ, severing it. The demon did not cry out, but released sprays of scalding excrement from pores along its back and disengaged itself. Harry spat its muscle out as the demon crawled away. Then he looked towards the fire. All other concerns were forgotten in the face of what he saw. Swan had stood up. He was burning head to foot, his hair, his clothes, his skin. There was no part of him that was not alight, but he was standing nevertheless, raising his hands to his audience in welcome. The rapparee had ceased its advance. It stood a yard or two from Swan, its limbs absolutely still, as if it were mesmerized by the astonishing trick. Harry saw another figure emerge from the head of the stairs. It was Butterfield. His stump was roughly tied off. A demon supported his lopsided body. "Put out the fire," demanded the lawyer of the Rapparee. "It's not so difficult." The creature did not move. "Go on," said Butterfield. "It's just a trick of his. He's dead, damn you. It's just conjuring." "No," said Harry. Butterfield looked his way. The lawyer had always been insipid. Now he was so pale that his existence was surely in question. "What do you know?" he said. "It's not conjuring," said Harry. "It's magic." Swan seemed to hear the word. His eyelids fluttered open, and he slowly reached into his jacket, and with a flourish produced a handkerchief. It too was on fire. It too was unconsumed. As he shook it out, tiny bright birds leaped from its folds on humming wings. The Rapparee was entranced by this sleight of hand. Its gaze followed the illusory birds as they rose and were dispersed, and in that moment the magician stepped forward and embraced the engine. It caught Swan's fire immediately, the flames spreading over its flailing limbs. Though it fought to work itself free of the magician's hold, Swan was not to be denied. He clasped it closer than a long-lost brother and would not leave it be until the creature began to wither in the heat. Once the decay began, it seemed the Rapparee was devoured in seconds, but it was difficult to be certain. The moment, as in the best performances, was held suspended. Did it last a minute, 2, 5? Harry would never know, nor did he care to analyze. Disbelief was for cowards, and doubt a fashion that crippled the spine. He was content to watch, not knowing if Swan lived or died, if birds, fire, corridor, or himself, Harry D'Amour, were real or illusory. Finally, the Rapparee was gone. Harry got to his feet. Swan was also standing, but his farewell performance was clearly over. The defeat of the Rapparee had bested the courage of the horde. They had fled, leaving Butterfield alone in the top of the stairs. "This won't be forgotten, or forgiven," he said to Harry. "There's no rest for you, ever. I am your enemy." "I hope so," said Harry. He looked back towards Swan, leaving Butterfield to his retreat. The magician had laid himself down again. His eyes were closed, his hands replaced on his chest. It was as if he'd never moved. But now the fire was showing its true teeth. Swan's flesh began to bubble, his clothes to peel off in smuts and smoke. It took a long while to do the job, but eventually the fire reduced the man to ash. By that time, it was after dawn, but today was Sunday, and Harry knew there would be no visitors to interrupt his labors. He would have time to gather up the remains, to pound the bone shards and put them with the ashes in a carrier bag. Then he would go out and find himself a bridge or a dock, and put Swan into the river. There was precious little of the magician left once the fire had done its work, and nothing that vaguely resembled a man. Things came and went away. That was a kind of magic. And in between, pursuits and conjurings, horrors, guises, the occasional joy. That there was room for joy. That was magic too. So there you have it, wildlings. Cautionary indeed. And, like all good stories, it leaves you still wondering. Questions, as well as answers, in equal measure. Stay scary, wildlings. Never forget the uses of a good axe, and make the most of your nights.